And I think that's the big difference.
Mm. But there is travel into and out of New York.
If you're coming from, so, I mean, the number of states, last time I was following this a few days ago, was 35 states. So if you are coming from any of these 35 states, you have to become, they check you and then they quarantine you for 14 days.
Okay.
So,
Mm.
yeah.
I think what you said is important. You have to rise above and take charge and show leadership and make things happen. I think
Yeah,
that's
that's, I mean, that's not, even when I worked as a civil servant nearly 3 decades ago, before I moved to the UN in the late 90s, I have come across several situations myself where I wouldn't be equal to the challenge.
yeah,
But then you wake up pretty quickly. That's why you are put there. That's
yeah,
your job. That's your
yeah,
calling.
yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, it's terrible that you are in charge of the lives and livelihoods of people. Uh, in my case, at a much smaller scale, at a district level, but for these people, they're running very important states, and I mean, New York's GDP, state GDP, is 35% more than Indonesia, the fourth largest country in the world.
Yeah,
And that's not something to be taken lightly.
that's correct. Yeah. And also, I think it's also shown that how you manage dense and large populations too. So that's not an excuse.
It's easy actually. They make it very complex because they bring in other elements into the equation. It's
Mm.
pretty simple. Keep it fact based. Tell people the truth, and there's no need to sugarcoat it because the truth will catch up with you. It catches up with you pretty fast in a
Yeah,
pandemic. So just be honest, be truthful. And if you don't have resources, tell people you don't have resources. I mean, what is the challenge of India now? It could have been done much better. People could have been easily moved around in the first
yeah,
phase,
yeah, yeah,
and then you could have shut it down.
yeah,
Um, we would be then in thousands now. Now every day we are adding 80,000 roughly cases
yeah,
because people have limited patience for um, a complete lockdown. So that is the Brahmastra. So you had to use it wisely. It was
yeah.
used before there was a problem,
Mm.
and that comes generally from a thought process where you think you know,
Mm, mm,
and then you
mm.
stop asking.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the challenge.
If I'm allowed to interrupt, sorry about that
Yes,
interesting
please.
exchange there, but
I mean,
we are, hi Satya, thank you so much for taking the time today. So I think we have about over 100 participants and we are 3 minutes past the hour. So I guess it's okay to start, and we have colleagues keeping an eye on the waiting room. So if people join, they'll be allowed in. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much for taking the time out this afternoon. And I know our students, this is your afternoon off. So if you're here, it's great to see this turnout. And I see also senior faculty colleagues here. So it's wonderful. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Meenal Pathak, and I work with the Global Center for Environment and Energy at Ahmedabad University. And just a little bit about our center. So members at our center work with the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And we work on areas such as energy policy, climate change mitigation, and sustainable cities. And just let me go over some housekeeping rules. Please keep your microphone muted and videos off to save bandwidth if you're not speaking. And please feel free during the talk as well to post your questions and comments on chat, and we'll pick this up after the talk. So just very quickly going over today's talk, this seminar on UN Sustainable Development Goals, how the student community can accelerate change. is jointly hosted by Ahmedabad University's Leadership Seminar Series and Sustainability Seminar Series, which says a lot about how we mainstream sustainability at the university, both in operations and in academics. So we have sustainability courses at the undergraduate level. It's a core in the foundation program for the first year students. Sustainability Society and Society that Samir Shah here, one of the co-moderators, teaches for our commerce and MBA students. We also have a core course on sustainability in the MBA program for first year. And since 2019, we have started a new doctoral program in areas of energy and climate change. So I guess I'll stop here with this quick introduction, but I'll pass on to Professor Pankaj Chandra, the Vice Chancellor of Ahmedabad University, to please make the introductions. Over to you, Professor Chandra.
Thank you very much, Meenal, for really putting the university's effort around sustainability at the center of much of what we are doing. So thanks for mentioning that, and thanks for coordinating this. Well, it is indeed a pleasure to introduce two very, very illustrious experts from the field. Both of them are, and I'll dare to say it, friends of Ahmedabad University. Satya S. Tripathi, who is the UN Assistant Secretary General and head of the New York office at UN Environment. Welcome, Satya, and thank you very much for taking time to come back again. We really enjoyed the last time when you were here on campus, and you know, the hall was entirely packed. And the message that you left with us has been very, very motivating for us to do more and more things around sustainability as we go along, and make it really a central mission of the world of business, the world of engineering, as well as the School of Arts and Sciences. Just for benefit of others who've not seen Satya's background earlier, he is a development economist and a lawyer with long years of experience, has been with UN since 1998, and has worked around the world, and especially in Indonesia, where he facilitated the cooperation and funding for post-tsunami and post-conflict recovery efforts. He is also works in the areas of climate change, human rights, democratic governance, and legal affairs. Most interesting, you know, Satya was instrumental in establishing financing mechanisms in India and Indonesia to leverage private finance for public goods, which is saying a lot about the changing times. He has previously served on the World Economic Forum's Global Advisory Council on Forests, and has been, as he was talking a few minutes ago, part of India's National Civil Service. So welcome, Satya, and thank you once again. The co-moderator with Meenal today is Samir Shah, who is the managing principal at Sattva Investment Advisors. Samir has been actively involved with energy, water, agriculture, and waste projects in India. He's been so a consummate advocate of sustainability that we've been having conversation for several years. And very honestly, it was his persistence many a times that has led us to do several of the conversations that we are doing today, including the current one. Prior to this, he was a founder and CEO of Sattva Asia Opportunities Fund. He was a vice president, fixed income, credit and commodities at Goldman Sachs, and once the VP at Salomon Brothers. But most important, he's a fellow alum from the Wharton School, and a young professor here at Ahmedabad University. So welcome, Samir, and over to both of you, Samir and Meena.
Thank you so much, Professor Chandra. And I think let's just get into it. So the floor is all yours, Mr. Tripathi. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Pankaj, and thank you, Meenal. It's always a pleasure to come back to Ahmedabad University to interact with students and faculty. And I say this with all seriousness because I have been the product of an educational system where students perhaps care, but teachers don't. And then you wander your way around to purpose in life, and that's the state of most educational institutions in India. And in that crowd, Ahmedabad University and institutions such as Ahmedabad University stand out as shining examples of purposeful leadership, um, what purposeful leadership can achieve, whether it is the vice chancellor or the professors, when you care about students and why they are where they are. We run a tremendous mentoring program at our offices in New York, which is a 6 month internship, basically at the uh, basic level. It's, you can call it an internship, but we call it a mentoring program for the simple reason that when somebody who pays a fortune, or their parents find the resources to send their child to some of these most meaningful institutions, when they come and spend 6 months of their life with you, your responsibility just grows manifold to help them grapple with the most pressing issues of the world and walk away richer, both with wisdom and experience, knowledge they do bring to the equation. And that's what I see reflected in the way Ahmedabad University conducts its business in enriching the lives and thought process of students. So I'm really grateful to have been invited to come and speak, and I take this responsibility with all humility and seriousness. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Samir, as well, who's a dear friend and a fellow activist. That we've been trying to do things that are um, on the face of it extraordinary, because it hasn't been done before, but it also comes from a deep-seated belief that everything is possible if you try hard enough. The word impossible is only in a fool's dictionary, and as life experiences has shown us, you always find a way, and that's the message I would like the students and the scholars on this webinar today to walk away with, that if you try hard enough, you would always find a way. Let me now move on to the topic of the day that I'll be focusing on, which is what can students do to advance UN sustainability goals. I think before we go there, it is very important to understand what is UN sustainability goals and why are they important for the world. Um, so let me start by going back 20 years in time when the UN developed the Millennium Development Goals. It is the precursor to the SDGs. They were called MDGs. There were 8 of them, and and these are facts. You may not find them anywhere, perhaps not written about enough. It was the year 2000, and suddenly everybody was excited about it. That okay, you've turned the corner, and it's a new millennium. We need to do something meaningful. So the MDGs were cooked up in the rooms of the UN headquarters primarily, with very little consultations with people that mattered the most, the vulnerable, the marginalized, women, and communities that are constantly under threat, whether it be the environmental defenders or human rights activists. So it was meaningful, but it was limited to the wisdom that the UN bureaucracy could bring to bear on the thought, on the idea. So they cooked up 7 MDGs, and then 2 important people were crossing the street because the UN headquarters is a big building on 42nd Street and First Avenue, and then across the street also there are other agency headquarters like UNDP, UNICEF, and others. So 2 of our UN leaders that were crossing the street and suddenly ran into each other, and they were talking to each other, and they said, "Hey, we didn't talk about partnerships. And so that's how the eighth MDG came about, building a global partnership. As important as that conversation was, it also tells you how facile it was. That if you didn't cross the street that day, we wouldn't have the eighth MDG. And that's really telling, you know. But thankfully, when the SDGs happened, we had woken up, and we had realized why was it so difficult to achieve the MDGs, because it was a very patchy performance. The SDGs happened because in 2012, the then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon set up the global high-level panel on a post-2015 development agenda. Work began 3 years in advance. And then that was a very, very engaging consultative process. The high-level panel was co-chaired by um, Prime Minister of UK, the President of Indonesia, and the President of Liberia. So three continents, and people were represented in that conversation. Of course, everybody was represented, but in terms of the co-chairs, um, I was backstopping the President of Indonesia in his role as the co-chair. So I had a ringside view of how the process developed. The high-level panel submitted its report. The report called for comprehensive discussions with stakeholders as to what must constitute sustainable development goals. And that's how we came up with the 17 SDGs. And the last one in this case as well is building a global partnership. But this was much better thought through. There were millions of people that provided their opinions and choices as to what must be part of the SDGs. So from everything from food security to oceans to clean air to livelihoods to sustainability, everything is in there. And why is it important? It is important because societies, if you look at the last 2,000 years of human history, we could go back 5,000 years, but the last 2,000 years are perhaps more evidence-based, much better recorded history in terms of how societies fall apart when it becomes a society of the rich and the powerful, with the 99% working literally for the 1% to basically enrich the 1%. Societies fall apart, and we don't need to be very clever people to understand that if you are not able to take everybody along, it simply does not work. And that's true of current day as well. You cannot, just to give you an example, we are in the age of COVID-19, the country where I am at right now in the United States. If you look at published data from Johns Hopkins and every other research institution, Washington University, that publish these things on a regular basis, uh, it is striking that the worst victims of COVID-19 are the marginalized communities, black and colored people, poor people, people that have low nutrition levels. So we knew that disasters affect poor people much worse than it does people that have wealth and resilience. And if you literally live off from one meal to the other meal, and that's your resilience level, the moment disaster strikes, that's what it does. It snatches away that meal from a lot of the family members because you need one family member to be saved, and then you just don't have the resources. And so that is why the SDGs are important. That if you achieve the SDGs, you will get to a certain level of prosperity that will then become the bulwark against any damage that any disaster or pandemic can cause in the future. And that is why there are 17 SDGs. That is why it is so elaborate. That is why it covers pretty much the life cycle of the planet, as well as all the 7.8 million species that inhabit the planet. Now, add to that other challenges. Now, you would have read yesterday that India's GDP, and I'm using the data from India because you are much more current with the data that is coming out in India on a daily basis, has shrunk 23.9% over the last quarter. That's unprecedented by any standards. Not that India brought it upon itself. Maybe it would have been a little better, perhaps, if you could have used X option or Y option, but I don't think it would have been much different. If you look at countries with far greater resilience and far greater collective wealth, they are in the similar situation, and India cannot be any different because this is a globally connected marketplace. You don't get to pick and choose your pains and your sufferings when a pandemic strikes. And then that is why we really need to understand that the pandemic is going to make it much more difficult for countries to really do what is right. A few days ago, I was in conversation with Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan, the Minister of Oil and Natural Gas, Petroleum and Natural Gas, and we were discussing a variety of challenges. And one of the things he mentioned, and this is also in the public domain, so it's not confidential information, is that in the first 3 months of the lockdown process, the government lost 40,000 crores revenue just from his ministry, not the entire whole of government. So that is how existential a challenge this can become. And we are only in the beginning of that pandemic cycle. And why do I say that? Because the vaccine, as of course, it is politically convenient. You hear that from a lot of world leaders. And I say it convenient and necessary at the same time, because leaders are supposed to inspire confidence in their constituents and their people. So you hear a lot of um, inspiring and hopeful statements like the vaccine is just around the corner, because that's what they need to do to keep their people hopeful, because we live in hope. But at the same time, sometimes the hopeful turns to the wishful, that we could pull it off in the next few weeks. And as you would have seen, a lot of those statements have been proven to be wrong, as well intended as they would have been at the time they were made, that we are already in September and we are nowhere near a vaccine. And even in those vaccine options that are currently undergoing phase 3 trials, it will be long before you would have meaningful data being captured, analyzed, and then again the the vaccine modules being tweaked to deal and address with those, and then further tests, and they take 21 days each cycle. So it's not going to happen anytime soon, but it will happen. The best of human enterprise and imagination is at work, and we have no reasons to believe that it won't happen, but it's going to take time, and that time has to be managed more effectively, and that also affects the SDGs. And then the last thing is climate change. Um, for those of you that are following the climate conversation closely, there are three things to remember. There's the Paris Agreement of 2015, which a lot of people talk about very endearingly, because it is indeed gratifying to see all the countries of the world come together for the first time. They had been talking for a long time, so they come together every year, but it was only with the Paris Agreement that everybody agreed on something. It is not to a standard, it is not to a measure that everybody agreed. There's no common benchmark or a standard there. Countries came together with their own understanding of their challenges and opportunities and contributions. And they produced something called the INDCs, the Intended National Determined Contributions, which then became the NDCs. And then the amalgamation of all the NDCs is called the Paris Agreement. So as gratifying as it is that we have a Paris Agreement, but there are no enforcement mechanisms as yet. That's still in conversation. It's been 5 years. And it is also a fact that if the Paris Agreement was fully implemented, it would result in 3.2 degrees of global warming as compared to the pre-industrial levels. That's not going to save us. And by the way, even that 3.2 degrees pathway is not being achieved at this time. Some countries are doing well in terms of their commitments, but then there are other countries that accuse those countries that are doing well of having promised too little, and hence you are able to deliver. We promised a lot, and hence we are not able to deliver. And so there's all kinds of opinions in the room, and at this time, it's not moving forward the way we would have liked it to. You would be happy to note that India is achieving its promises under the Paris Agreement, but then again, there are a lot of countries that on the other side of the aisle that say that, oh well, India promised too little, and that's why it is achieving its targets. Be that as it may, it is gratifying that India is indeed achieving its targets, whether they were small or big. In international agreements, you go by what was agreed, and what was agreed is being done. So that's something very gratifying to note. The other thing is that, as Meenal would have taught you in the classes, the IPCC came up with a report a few years ago that 2 degrees pathway is a desirable pathway, and that if we achieve that by the turn of the century, or we stay under that, we would be able to turn around without much damage to the living fabric of the planet. Now that was old science, as IPCC told us um, very recently, that 2 degrees doesn't work anymore because you will have exponential damage to the living fabric at 2 degrees. We need to stay at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, compare that with this. The 2 degree pathway carbon budget is 2,900 gigatons. And as of today, the world has spent more than 2,600 gigatons of that carbon budget. And we are roughly spending anywhere between 40 to 45 gigatons a year. This year might be a little less because of the COVID challenge, of course, and the fact that most of us are working from home, and there's little transportation across the planet. Airlines have literally shut down. So that will contribute marginally. I wouldn't say that the 42 gigatons will drop to 20 or something, which would be very desirable, but that's not what is going to happen. You might see 1 or 2 gigatons drop in the total expenditure this year. Now, if you take that, and if you take the 300 gigatons remaining, we're talking about a 7-year time period, by which time we will actually shoot past the possibility of staying at under 2 degrees around the turn of the century. And it'll only get worse and worse and worse. And so that is why it is so important to look at the sustainable development goals in light of the climate challenge, in light of the COVID challenge, and then think of the opportunity. I mean, what is the opportunity here? I have worked on the front lines of disaster recovery and sustainable development, and the small but significant lessons I have learned is that if you don't prepare for disasters, you suffer inordinately more than those that are prepared. And that's a part of the resilience as well. And in that, it's a disaster of untold proportions that is waiting to strike. A few years ago, you would remember there were floods in Kerala. And we were told by the meteorologists and the weather scientists and everybody else in that space that this is 100 years, once in 100 years flood. And then 2 years later, Kerala had another flood, which was again pretty much of the same magnitude. Uh, and then the lesson there is that these kind of weather disturbances and the kind of challenges that they bring about are going to be more and more um, uh, recurrent, and the population is then left to bear the brunt. In the Caribbean, which is closer to the United States here, we are seeing these hurricanes that are far more frequent than they have been before, and they leave behind havoc of a scale that has uh, that would be impossible to imagine a few decades earlier. And then that's becoming more and more frequent across the planet. And then that is also going to be an added challenge moving forward. And that is why we need to look at sustainable development alongside the climate challenge. And that's why the next 10 years, the decade of action, is so very important. The decade of action starts on the 1st of January 2021. It's called the UN Decade of Action, but primarily it is the decade where we work together to achieve the sustainable development goals, and along with it, meet the climate challenge, so that we remain at least under a 2-degree pathway. A 1.5-degree pathway looks highly unlikely, although that is a very inspiring goal to target. Now, how does that matter to students? Why should they be bothered? And what can they do about it? And many a times, when I was a young student, I would ask the question to myself that what can I do to change things? Little things, it's not big things, little things. And I often share a life example that I encountered myself as a young boy when I started shaving. My mother advised me. So I was wasting a lot of water, and I grew up in a small city in Orissa called Cuttack, and we had a municipal tap at home. So I would just leave it open, and I would be shaving. And then she just came and what is famously known in the family as the bucket test that I was given at the age of 16. And then she put a few buckets under the tap as I was shaving. And then at the end of it, she had gathered more than 70 liters of water. And then she told me that there are better ways of doing it. And the next day, she brought me a little jug that was about half a liters, and she told me how to do it. And the other day, I was looking back and talking to my children, uh, and, uh, and telling them that that is the most gratifying personal experience I have of being responsible as a young adult, was that I have saved 1 million liters of fresh water by just not being irresponsible. So there's a personal level at which you can do things, and that you don't need your professors or your teachers to tell you how to go about your life. These are self imbibed values and ethics and morals, that we are responsible to the planet. So those are things that you can do, and you would be surprised, like myself, more than 40 years down the line, that these little things that you change in your own behavior can produce such spectacular results for the planet. And so that's at the personal level. But you are all thinking individuals, and you are at the cusp of entering into the mainstream of life. Because before you enter the mainstream, you are basically preparing yourself, be it acquiring knowledge, be it soaking in life experiences. But when you enter the mainstream, reality hits hard, and it hits very hard. You come out with the best of degrees. Yesterday, I was briefing a group of new interns that have joined our office, and they all have degrees from Yale and Harvard, and you can name it, the best of the schools in the world. But they're looking for that bridge, the bridge where they can actually use the knowledge they've acquired, and cross over to the other side, where that knowledge becomes useful and meaningful, not just for us, because we need to be three things as productive human beings. We need to be uh, individually constructive, and societally productive, and responsible as planetary species, which we have been partly successful at, but mostly not, especially the last one. And that you can do only if you find something that really makes you happy, that makes you understand that life has a purpose, and that is higher than ourselves. um, and you would, if you look deep within, you will find that you are the happiest when you are in the company of friends, when you are having meaningful conversations, when you walk away helping somebody else. That gives you a level of happiness that you don't find when you walk into a restaurant and perhaps pay for a good meal and then come out. That makes you satisfied, but not necessarily happy at the highest level of that term. What makes you happy is when your life finds purpose. And in that, I think the SDGs have a huge role to play. As you leave the portals of your hallowed institution and enter the mainstream of life, you will have numerous opportunities to be responsible. You're in a boardroom, you're the youngest person in that conversation. What can you bring into that conversation? Can you talk about the challenges facing the world and how you, as part of a responsible business enterprise, need to do better? There are enormous examples around the world of doing things that are meaningful, that are purposeful. I will mention one little example from my own experience in Indonesia, which was when I was not working for the UN, and we set up something called the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility. Um, it was it was an amazing experience from my perspective, because I just asked myself. I said, um, and it all came from a conversation of which I was a major part. Norway, the country, gave $1 billion to Indonesia to keep their forests. It was a pretty simple arrangement. Here is $1 billion on the table, and all you need to do is get the MRV mechanism, the measuring, reporting, and verification mechanism, put in place, and we quantify the forest carbon that Indonesia has. If you stay at the same levels, every year you get paid a certain amount. It's a pay for performance model. And why? Because if you keep your forests, the world benefits through rainfall cycles, through carbon sequestration, oxygenation, ecosystem benefits, and the benefits are too many to count here. And but it didn't happen because not because either of the governments were not interested. They were super interested. They tried very hard, but whenever public money gets involved, there's a lot of bureaucracy that gets involved, and that does not lend itself to efficient performance. And it has nothing to do with Indonesia or Norway. It's exactly the same in most parts of the world, with very rare exceptions, but those exceptions actually prove the rule. And we took the idea, we said, okay, can the forest be protected with private resources? If you can create a win-win partnership, and a few partners came together, including the UN, and we set up this facility. And the first investment there turned out to be $350 million, which is in the range of 3,000 crores of private finance, ultra low cost finance, which is now employing 50,000 people, the same people that were being used by nefarious interests to cut down the forests. And it has now put in place, as a horseshoe buffer, the world's largest sustainable rubber plantation on degraded land. And it protects the rest of the 80% of the forest that was still there, but it was going every day. And so these models are there. And these models are possible when a group of people that care about the planet come together and try to make the impossible possible. And that's not special to those people or to that context. That is a possibility that exists in our mind. You have to win in the mind before you win in the battlefield. So if you think SDGs, if you decide that, okay, let me look at the whole gamut of SDGs, and I'm going to spend an hour today on really finding out about what they really mean, not the names, sustainable consumption and production. What exactly does it mean? Or a global partnership, what does it really mean? And if you internalize that, you would see that as you enter the mainstream of life, that would keep coming back to the top of mind recall, that, oh, wow, I could actually do this here, or I should say this here. You would also look the wisest person in the room, because SDGs, as popular as they are, a lot of people don't know about them. So you would not only be educating your fellow travelers, but you would also be presenting ideas that can actually make a difference to people at the bottom of the pyramid. And then that is a contribution that will be far bigger than any money you can make for yourselves. We all need that. Sustenance is important for us to stay alive and do what we must to make it a better planet, but that is cannot be the purpose of life. Life has a higher purpose and a higher calling, and I'm sure if you kept SDGs at the forefront of your thought processes, you would find that calling. It will be different for different people, but you will certainly find a calling that you will be proud of a few decades down the line. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk. And I kind of wrote down when you were talking, there were really some great thoughts there. So I guess that leaves us with about 45 minutes of good discussion time. And I'm going to open it up. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll pass on the microphone. And in the meantime, maybe also if Professor Chandra or Samir want to come in very briefly on any observations, then happy to pass the floor to you. But I'd really welcome some good questions from the students. So yeah.
Sure. So Meena, with your permission, I might just speak for a minute, actually.
Sure.
So Satya, as you mentioned, very inspiring talk, Satya, and I think it was very, very inspiring to me as well, even though I've heard you speak many times before. And thank you for taking the time to speak to the students. So I just wanted to spend a minute, Meena, talking about sustainability and society and how we came up with that course. So as Pankaj kindly mentioned, we have been in discussions for quite some time to say, look, how do we bring sustainability and discussions regarding that into mainstream and not think of it as just a pure environmental concern, but say that, look, globally it is becoming mainstream in the thought processes, in businesses, in governments and society. And hence we need to bring that. And Ahmedabad University, as Pankaj mentioned, and I have been following a lot of work that you guys are doing as well, is at the forefront of leading change. So I thought this was another sort of aspect where adding to the work that Professor Shukla and you are doing to see how we could together do this. The one change though is that I want people to look at sustainability not as a cost item, but also as a revenue item, in the sense that it is not only a challenge, but an opportunity. I mean, I think today the day is Satya, so I won't speak for long. But people only have to look at one example: how Tesla's market capitalization today exceeds the market capitalization of the next 8 companies, and this is a pure clean energy company. We will also look at change in many respects, and I think carbon. I think the point I want to bring about in my course is that sustainability covers carbon emissions, but there is multiple other things as well, including water, including waste management, including sort of land use change, biodiversity. So we are trying to bring these points across. And the reason for the title at Sustainability and Society is to say that the responsibility for sustainability is not with one individual, but is with society. And that includes government, it includes private sector, and it includes citizens. So that is why the term society, to say, look, it has to be something which is, in order to accelerate what we want to do, all parties have to come together. And that is a partnership between sort of 3 constituents who all stand to gain by what the benefits can do. And even in the class, we're talking about energy efficiency, like Satya mentioned, about simple things like I think saving water during that time, but resource efficiency, energy efficiency, but just putting sustainable development goals into the back of your mind into any decisions that you make or as you think through processes is something that the objective of the course is to say that, look, if we can add that as an element of thinking as people make decisions, I think that would have gone a long way in achieving the objective. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Great, Samir. Thank you so much. And we've always been struggling getting our students to think that, hello, this is not something on the side that you have to do, but this is something that is so much more mainstream, and it almost is a differentiator for where you will be in future. But I have a couple of questions here on chat, so I'm going to pass it on to Kopal. Kopal Agrawal is one of our PhD students. Kopal, you have a question on chat. Do you want to come up and speak? Please unmute yourself. If you're talking, we cannot hear you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, sir, Tripathi sir, and Sameer sir, for such a great talk. It's very inspiring for our students to have you all be to hear you and be inspired. So, I am a PhD student with environment and energy, and I have a keen interest in behavioral science. um, my it's not actually a question, but I'm still looking at how a behavioral change, especially in developing countries. I have seen many success stories in developed countries where they have made behavioral changes and it has led to uh, great sustainable changes in the society and in their economy as well. But not so many in developing countries. So if you can put on some examples and how can we do it, especially when Sameer sir said that businesses as is a very important aspect of this. If we make a goal economically viable, then it makes more sense for people and businesses to come together. So thank you very
So,
much.
yeah, pass it on to Satya first, and maybe Sameer if you wanted to add as well.
Thank you, Kopal. Um, well, I think I would approach is a great question. So I'll approach it from two different dimensions. Um, the first, of course, the assumption that you need to have an economic model for private sector to be interested. I think that's correct, but the underlying basis for that assumption needs to be looked at. What is the economic model? Currently, the economic model is the brown economy, as is referred to now more frequently than before, is that there's input versus output. The externalities are never looked at. So it is private profits and public losses. You take the case of mining contracts or mining concessions that governments give out routinely around the world. So there's an assessment of what are the mineral deposits based on whatever scientific data that is available, and then there's a general understanding of cost of extraction. And if you are well-meaning, you throw in a little bit of sustainability in there. You will have to pay this much of a cess, that will then take care of rehabilitating the area where the mining is happening. And then you add all that, and then you add a little bit of government administrative costs and this and that, and then you come at a revenue model to say, okay, if you pay us this much, or this is the bottom line, and you can bid from above from this is the floor price, and then you can bid from here on, and that's how these biddings are done. What is not looked at is a more comprehensive understanding of what does it entail. uh, what does different kind of mining processes entail when you're doing open face mining or open pit mining, or you're disturbing underground water channels. How does it contaminate the rest of the water sources, the aquifers, the groundwater? If you take the example of India, a lot of parts of the world, and Samir has worked at the front lines of this, the arsenic levels are carcinogenic. First, you have to dig down to 100 feet or 200 feet to get anything that you can call water. And then you find that either causes fluorosis or cancer. And it wasn't like this, let's say 100 years ago. So we have actually brought it upon ourselves by following business models that do not look into the true cost of these kind of interventions. So they actually do far more harm to society than they do good. So when we are talking about economic models, we really need to think what is the true cost of any investment or any business plan, and that's one. But the second thing is that the economic cost actually can be tweaked. And let me go back to that uh, example that I cited from Indonesia. That's a partnership with Michelin, which is second largest tire company in the world. And So finding underlying interests. So Michelin buys natural rubber from the international markets because that's what they need for high quality tires. And so if your business model talks about, so you dwell in possibilities, not in limitations. When you try to build up these business models, you dwell in possibilities. So what are the possibilities here? The possibilities are that the government of Indonesia, which is the custodian of the forest, has lost about 90,000 hectares of a 400,000 hectare rainforest. And that number is increasing by the day because of the plundering and the illegal logging. So the government's interest is in stemming that loss of forest because they are deeply interested in saving their forests. So there's an interested party. Then Michelin buys natural rubber anyways. So there's an interested party. Then there are 50,000 people living in the periphery of the forest that are living off the forest. And then there are vested interests that are actually misusing their goodness to, instead of protecting the forest, to destroy it. And then, of course, you have a whole lot of supply chain and value chain people. And then there are financiers and there are people that actually want to invest in sustainability, but there are no shovel ready projects that they can actually use to put their money into. So you bring all of them together. It's a tough conversation. You bring all of them together and produce a business model where actually you can raise money at 50% of the cost that Michelin itself is able to get if it goes to market. Why? Because all investment is about risk. That is why if you get 6% interest from a bank in India or 8%, if you go to a developed country, you get 1% or 2% or nothing. Why? Because there is zero risk to the bank in taking your money and lending it forward to somebody who will, and the massive debt crisis in India or in a lot of other developing countries is actually the risk that I'm talking about, because when that risk is priced into whatever it is that you are depositing and somebody is borrowing, then the costs become exponential, and that's how businesses don't prosper. And this is why when you ring fence all the risks, when all the partners are on around the table, the buyer, the producer, the intermediaries, the financier, the government, when everybody is, they're not talking alone, they're talking together. So it is the power of the virtuous partnership that actually makes it possible. When actually we issued the first tranche of that 350 million investment was $95 million through a sustainable corporate sustainability bond issued from Singapore. It got subscribed pretty quickly because there's a market and people trust you more because there is no risk anymore. I mean, there are risks, of course, of the global economic downturns and cycles and all, but not the regular business risks. Because normally what happens, there will be many of you that are very imaginative that want to get into business. So you will go and produce something because there's a market forecast and there's a possible demand. You produce something, but you may not be able to sell it. But if you already have the buyer that has signed an offtake agreement already, that is itself good enough to get you money from the capital markets. So understanding these possibilities and dwelling on possibilities rather than limitations can actually change the conversation.
Thank you so much. And that's just the perfect segue into the next question.
Nidal, may I just add a very quick comment?
Sure, please.
So I think to add to the comment Satya made, so I sit on the board of Shell Foundation in India, and we have 80 companies that are looking at energy efficiency projects in India and Africa. So it is fair to say that this move has happened from developed markets also to developing markets as well. I mean, one thought process that is permeating, business models is that conservation is as important a business objective as consumption. And everything ranging from either smart metering or better ways to do something or making energy efficient cars, changing the material that is used in manufacturing, increasing battery life, all of these factors incrementally, as Satya said, there's no one magic bullet, but all of this put together allow people to sort of make proper business decisions. The second thing, and I will stop there, is about $267 trillion of assets are managed by the institutional investment community. And as of date, at least 10 to 15% are managed on ESG principles, and that number is likely to go to 70%. Assuming it doesn't go to 70%, but let's cut it by even 35%, that's a lot of money that will be invested in companies following ESG principles. So it would be in the interest of the private sector to say either you qualify by meeting these principles or you don't. And then so you get rewarded in terms of market capitalization as well. So it's not only a cost item, but it's in the interest of corporations who are forward looking to adopt these principles in their thinking and execution.
Thank you. Yeah, there is a question from one of our alumni and a young startup, Chetsi. So Chetsi, did you want to come in with your question? Please do keep it short in the interest of time.
Hi. Hi, so my question is to Mr. Satya. I run an online marketplace called brownliving.in where we curate all sustainable products from across India, made in India, made without plastics or chemicals, and they're all earth friendly. There's a curation process that we follow. One of our major challenges is to actually calculate the carbon impact of a certain product or its plastic footprint, to be able to validate it to customers on what the score of that particular product is for sustainability. It's becoming a huge challenge for us to do that. The other challenge is we are also competing with mainstream FMCG brands who have much cheaper products and they have much more accessibility in the market. So how would you approach these two problems? And I would love to hear your inputs on this.
Did you want to come in to respond?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a difficult question because it's not about how much power the FMCGs have in the marketplace. They do, um, because size gives you a certain level of presence in the marketplace, and you are able to spend more effectively, and that's how you see a lot of startups actually sell out in their early stages of growth to bigger competitors, because you find it incredibly hard to do something worthwhile in terms of scale and size. And there comes an interesting offer that you find, say, okay, let me take this money, and you move on. And that's something that we see regularly. It happens, and then that big competitor then takes that small startup, because they have other nodes into which they can plug in the idea of that small startup and make it big. Um, um, uh, if you look at around the marketplace, sometimes the startups that have little value, then they go on to grow. I'll give you an example of Cisco and Zoom. In 2013, the founder of Zoom, who used to work for Cisco, brought the idea of Zoom to Cisco. It was turned down, actually. And now Zoom's market capitalization is higher than the whole market capitalization of Cisco in 2013, because the founder of Zoom believed in the idea and persisted.
Yeah.
So sometimes a bit of persistence helps, but at the same time, that is not the only thing that helps. Uh, you have to be twice as determined to make it happen, and work with as many partners as you can. Sometimes giving away a little bit of yourself in terms of ownership, and this is what I tell often to people that I work with on virtuous partnerships. Samir and I work together to support something called the Community Managed Natural Farming Program in Andhra Pradesh. It is a program supported by the Sustainable India Finance Facility, of which Samir is the pro bono chief investment advisor. And there, of course, it's a catalyst. We don't put money. Of course, we help through a lot of knowledge resources and research and other stuff. We also run a very interesting fellow program where the government of Andhra Pradesh gives a fellowship of 40,000 rupees per month to young and enterprising people that would want to go and spend a year of their life um, improving the lives of small farmers and working on the front lines of sustainability. So this is also a kind of an advertisement in that sense. Any of you are interested in a fellowship, do reach out to Samir. But coming back to that program, that's a fascinating program where the government of Andhra Pradesh is working to convert 6 million farmers, that's 60 lakh farmers, the entire farmer population in Andhra Pradesh to zero chemical farming. And as of today, they have already converted 10 lakh farmers, and they're well on their way in the next 5-6 years to achieve that milestone, not just for the state, but also for India and for the planet. And how do they do that? They do that by being persistent. And recently, a few months ago, actually, KfW, the German Development Bank, signed up an MOU to fund $300 million to that program. And you'll be surprised that the interest rates there are only 0.5%. That's the rate at which the money has been lent to the government. So, and it is not a national sovereign loan to the government of India. It is a subnational loan. And there are huge risks. But then KfW rose to the challenge and said, if this is helping so many people, this is where we should be putting our money. They had never invested in anything of this nature, of this magnitude, anywhere on the planet. So the possibility is in the partnership. So when you agree to a partnership, don't take credit for anything, because it happens a lot in partnerships. Even before you achieve anything, everybody goes out and starts talking about how wonderful they are and how important they are. If you're really trying to help the cause, you will see that together you are better. And when you work together with others, you will build a formidable partnership that will be impossible to fight back, but even if it is an FMCG major. And so look around your ecosystem and see what other startups are there. Could you work together and build a partnership that then becomes formidable, because the power is in the numbers. What is the lesson we learned from revolutions around the world? They don't have money, they don't have weapons, they just come out on the streets, people, and the numbers then frighten the worst of the dictators who resign and run away. And so the power is in the partnership. So I would strongly urge you to look around your own ecosystem and see if you can find partners, find other empathetic activists that you can actually partner with, and then that will make you a much more formidable force in the marketplace. Thank you.
That was a very optimistic response. Yeah, that's great. So I have Kabir next. Kabir, did you want to come in?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Sir, my question to you was, I have been studying with Meenal ma'am and Samir sir simultaneously for this semester. And also we have been doing some assignments they have been giving us. So one common thing that I researched and I found out on internet was there have been many inventions on sustainability that have not been adopted by India, and they are adopted by foreign countries. So the investor, the main innovators that are in India, they are not motivated to sell their or even imply their inventions in India due to the lack of maybe getting even the credit. So there is this invention that I talked to Samir sir about sustainable roads that were made of recyclable materials, and they were 10 times more stronger than the tar roads that are made. And
In Sweden. Yeah.
Yes. And similar examples were some time back, a Japanese guy made a chemical in which he just had to put it in the lake for a month, and the entire impurities of the lake would come up on the top, and they just had to remove the impurities in the lake, and he had converted his childhood lake into a clean lake. So I mean, there are many such inventions that are happening abroad and in India. So why has there been I mean, if the government does it, it would be a better support for the people who are like, I see Chetsi Ahuja who is doing something related to sustainability. So I think they would also be motivated to see some of these things coming into action. action in India?
Thanks, Kabir.
You want me to
Yes,
Yes,
yeah,
please.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, well, I think this invention has been used quite a bit in India, actually. There are lakhs of kilometers of roads that are using recycled plastic, especially single-use plastic bags and all that are reclaimed from the landfills. So this is actually quite a well-used innovation, if you call it. Of course, the jury is still out there. When you take that plastic and put it in the roads, what part of it then goes back into the ecosystem as microplastics? Because as you know, we have a huge challenge of microplastics in our oceans and in our terrestrial ecosystems that has now entered actually in a very strong way our food stream. And some solid research that came out last year tells us that every human being by number on an average consumes one credit card worth of plastic in their food every week. So that's 52 credit cards that you're having for your breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the course of 1 year. It's terrible. But that's the science part. It does more good because the same plastic bag is still in the ecosystem and degenerates much more worse manner and goes into the ecosystem anyways. So is this a better use? It certainly is. But that's perhaps a rare example where innovators their ideas catch up and others start using it. I think the innovation ecosystem is a challenging one, especially, and I'm not talking anything specific to India, especially in countries where patent laws are not as strongly implemented. And that's a challenge for any innovator because if you can't protect your innovation, if everybody, and that holds true of piracy, we think it's a cool thing to find a website that streams a movie for free, but forgetting at the same time that so there's a dichotomy between how we practice these things and what we think should happen to us. So if you are using a pirated version of Microsoft Office and you still think that your innovation should get the market premium it should, there's a disconnect there. And change starts with the individual. So if everybody thought the same way about respecting the other person's creativity and innovation, I think we'll be in a very different place. Until then, this is a challenge that's not going to go away because people find different ways of copying things. If you watch Bollywood movies, you would see a lot of the very popular songs that we like to listen to are actually complete knockoffs of similar music made in other parts of the world. And same with other parts of the world that copy from Bollywood, perhaps. The point being that for us to expect others to respect our creativity, we have to respect other people's creativity as well. And if we can't do that, then we lose our moral right to be respected for what we do by the dint of our hard work and imagination. I don't think it answers your question, but it's a moral dilemma that we need to confront ourselves to be able to be in a better place where our work and efforts are recognized. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And these questions are not easy. And but I'm glad we are asking these questions. I'm glad we are having this conversation, right? And I'm so glad that not all of these students are in any of our courses, and they're all interested. They're all here, and they're asking really difficult questions. So I'm glad at the level at which conversations are deepening within the university, but also nationally. I have a bunch of questions here, but I wonder which one. So I'm going to just read out those three questions, and I leave it to you on which ones and in what order you would like to answer them. One is actually from a faculty colleague saying if you have any advice to the students to say it's not cool to consume. And while I agree that it's not cool to consume, but I also feel that in a like there is a big disparity. There's an inequality in the world. There are aspirations. So in that light, how do you see and advise on consumption? That is the first question. The second question is from one of our young researchers, Bandesh, who is asking if climate will take a back seat in light of COVID, and is a green recovery possible? So I pass it over to you.
Um, Thank you. Well, I think it's the answer is a bit complex to the first question. Is it cool to consume? Of course, it is cool to consume. There's nothing wrong with it. But just to give you an example, um, I was reading something recently, and there the author was talking about carbon footprint. So let's say you are cycling for an hour. You take a bicycle, so it's human energy, right? So if you're bicycling for an hour, your carbon footprint should be the same, right? Because you're bicycling for an hour. Not really. If the energy you use to bicycle for an hour came from bananas, then you are basically, your carbon footprint is 40 grams, right? But if you use a burger made from red meat that was grown in an area that had cut down forests to grow soya or grass or whatever, um, and the fries and the fat and the oil and everything else that goes with it, that is actually a 3.7 kilograms footprint. The same activity looks innocently similar. But if you go deeper, where did the energy come from? We talk a lot about solar energy, and we naively believe solar energy is all clean. Yes, in terms of operational part, it is clean because it's not using dirty fuel to produce the energy. It is using the sun's power to produce energy. But then you go a little deeper. What was it transported with? The PV cells. How were the PV cells produced? With coal generated energy, with diesel generated energy? I mean, we don't know. I mean, a lot of these questions, I mean, now we know, and you can actually use the metrics to go deeper and deeper and deeper into these things. But things that look innocuously simple are not. And so that's what to keep in mind when you are consuming. And if it's a need-based consumption, I think it's cool. When it becomes, I'll give you a quick example from my personal experience. Um, when I buy a baggage, let's say, I normally use it for 7 to 8 years. I'm certainly capable of buying the best brands. But the point is, do I need it? And it works perfectly fine. And even at the in 7 8 years point of time, I can actually gift it away to somebody who will be immensely grateful for getting a good bag actually. But I could change it every 6 months. I could use it in an irresponsible way, dropping it down staircases and throwing it around, and of course it will break. And then in 6 months' time, I need a new bag. So I think these are very personal. And if you feel responsible, I don't think there's no any rocket science here. If we feel responsible, we'll find ways of sustainable consumption. Do I need 100 pairs of dresses in my wardrobe? Or what is enough? Are 5 enough? Are 10 enough? That's a question for me to answer. And that's very individual. I don't think there are any set standards. Of course, if you look at the carbon footprint project, 1.8 is the optimal carbon footprint. And so, but if you look at it, most of the developed countries are at that are the top of that list. They have 7 to 8 per capita. That doesn't work for the planet. Uh, Nor does it work for the planet when half of the population goes hungry, and you do have a carbon footprint which is less than 1.8, which is quite a few developing countries. That doesn't help either. People need to be healthy and productive so that they can contribute to the best of their potential. And so it's a mixed bag. but 1.8 is the ideal number that is used as per capita carbon footprint.
Thank you. There is a question around the allocation, but let's not get there. I'd like to pass it on to the students. So I do see faculty colleagues also asking questions, but this event is really to engage the students a little bit more. So somebody called Veena was raising a hand. So Veena, did you want to come in? Because you haven't put your question down, I think.
Yes, ma'am, I had a question.
Could you speak louder? I'm not able to hear you very well.
Yeah, can I go ahead with my question?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so I'm in my first year of BA Economics major, and I also want to do my minor in Environment and Energy. And when I'm exploring these two topics on the internet, one term that I came across was degrowth, and um, what I saw was that although a lot of developed countries do embrace sustainable development policies and sustainability, uh, uh, such things, they're not all of them are as enthusiastic towards degrowth. So I was confused that why they should not be embracing degrowth if they are for sustainable development. And what do you think is the reason for it? Do you think those two concepts go hand in hand?
Well, I mean, let me see. Yes. So, yes, I mean, a paradigm shift in the existing concept of economic development is extremely important. Uh, and I would draw your attention to the fact that there are no unlimited resources as we somehow naively believe. It's about the same way like you put money in a bank. If you keep drawing your principal, there will be no money to draw in a few months or a few years, depending on how fast you take away your capital. The same with nature. It's about stocks and flows in nature. You can draw from nature. Nature is actually kinder than most banks in that it heals itself. If you look at nature as an engaged member of perhaps the most destructive of all species, but in your case you really care. So if you look at nature, you would see that nature is circular. If you look at a virgin rainforest, you would find the most vibrant of living, breathing spaces anywhere you can go to in the planet. And nobody has put a pinch of fertilizer or pesticide in those forests to make them what they are. Nature has. So if you appreciate the value that nature brings to make our lives more meaningful, and more constructive and more productive, then it will be a much easier argument to make. And the whole degrowth movement is about finding a new paradigm of economic development. Come to think of it, the example that I cited earlier from Andhra Pradesh, and now actually the government of Himachal Pradesh has also announced that they will be becoming the second state in India to become completely chemical fertilizer free. And so the group movement is growing. Now, come to think of it, what it does. Currently, by some studies, we are 50 harvests away from literally not being able to grow any food. The topsoil that produces all our food is actually depleting in most parts of the world 35 times faster than we are being able to create, or nature is being able to create it. So at that rate, we wouldn't be growing much food. And perhaps, of course, there are those that say, well, humans are very creative. They'll start growing food in their labs, maybe. But that's not what you want. And we don't know what that will do for us to live the full potential of our lives. So the challenge here is to understand that nature works in cycles, nature is circular, and nature works in stocks and flows. As long as you do not draw from nature beyond its carrying capacity, then you would be fine. To give you an example, the United States is about 4% of the world's population, and it uses 35% of the world's resources. And that is not something to aspire to, because you would need 6 more planets, and there are no 6 more planets. And that is why I was in a conversation with one of the famous astronauts, um, who teaches at Columbia University, and we had invited him to speak at one of our events at the UN, where just to to put some fire in the belly of our young uh, colleagues, just to listen to a different perspective. And he said that when I was doing this spacewalk, I actually looked around to the infinite space to say, hey, it's amazing. I have finally have the opportunity to look at the void of space much more closely, and it was gray, and there was nothing in it. And then I turned around and I saw our planet, Earth, the blue planet, like a glowing marble in the sky. And I told myself, what a fool I have been. What was I going to find here? You know, and so that's why, let's protect the planet we have. It's an amazing place. There is nothing like this. Um, Certainly not within the limits of our knowledge. We haven't found any. So if we just respect the stocks and flows in nature, we will do much better than we're doing now. Thank you, Veena.
Thank you. And I think we are 9 minutes to the hour. So, but there is one question that I would like to take, and it's one of the coordinators of the Environment Club. And I hope you will be able to address her query with your optimistic response. So, Khyati, can you please keep it very short?
Yes, ma'am. So, first of all, thank you, sir, Meenal ma'am, and Sameer sir for conducting this very inspiring talk. I'm asking this question to you on behalf of Panch Tattva, the Environment Club of the university. So, we are basically a community of students from different disciplines who are concerned about environmental problems. We try raising awareness regarding SDGs and carbon emissions. But when we ask people to consume responsibly, the counter question that we get is that it is not really going to make a vast difference because the big corporations and other nations are eventually increasing the emissions. So, how do you suggest that we counter this negative response?
Well, I think there is a very simple answer to that. Is that if you change behavior, you are the consumer. You would actually start looking for products that are sustainably produced. And then that will give a boost to the market for sustainable commodities. And that's how you change behavior. Behavior can be top down or bottom up. So, and if we are all responsible for ourselves, it will change things exponentially. And I can tell you from my personal experience that it does change things. So I'm sorry, there's not a more complex answer to this. If we ourselves change our behavior, start looking for products anchored in sustainability, sustainably produced, sustainably packaged, and that will change things, and that puts pressure on a lot of companies to be responsible. Sometimes regulation also helps. To give you an example, last year, Turkey, in the beginning of 2019, introduced a legislation that you would have to pay roughly in Indian money about 4 rupees if you wanted a plastic bag while buying your groceries. And you'd be surprised, on day one of the regulation, 85% people refuse to take a plastic bag. So sometimes it's the individual, sometimes it's the system. But what works best is a combination of both. And you have the power to reach out to your political leaders, either through direct engagement of the leaders with your club, Panchatattva, or through social media, tagging these people and basically telling them that you're not doing what is expected of you as a responsible citizen of the world. So there are so many ways you can really challenge those in authority without being abusive or violent, just in a meaningful way, and reason with them, and it works. And the best example, if you look around Europe, Europe is now increasingly electing very young people as their prime ministers and presidents. And they are increasingly electing people with green credentials as their members of parliament. The current European Parliament has an inordinately large number of people elected with green credentials as compared to before, very large numbers. So I think the tide is turning, and people like you will be at the forefront of that revolution. Thank you, Kathy.
Nice. I have seen this.
Meena, may I just
yeah.
add one point to it? So I think Satya talked about consumption, but I also wanted to talk about what we discussed coincidentally yesterday in class, which was on energy efficiency. So there's also changes happening on the production side as well. So we gave 3 examples, and in the interest of time, just be very quick. So in lighting, we used to use incandescent lamps, which moved to CFL, and now it is LED. So the difference in energy consumption between incandescent lamps and CFL, the CFL uses 30% of the energy that an earlier incandescent lamp light would use, which was used in the 1973s. And the LED uses 25% less than what even the CFL uses. If you look at cars, the energy that is being used and the energy efficiency of cars, or the mileage you get per gallon, either by use of new material, better engineering, or combination of size, is also increasing. Aircrafts today use 40% less fuel than they used to before by use of graphite materials instead of aluminum and steel. So while there are examples in consumption, there are many changes that can be made in production as well. One macro theme is that technology innovation leads to change, but it's actually technology diffusion, which is when you make technology available at a lower cost, which is acceptable to people overall. And you're seeing that in solar, you're seeing that in many aspects. In the interest of time, I'll be quick, but there are changes happening even on the production side. And there's a question I saw here about free riders. So free riders is what Satya referred to as externalities, which I define as the economic cost of an activity borne by unrelated third parties, which means the parties who are not, and the society pays the cost. So it can either be trained to behavior, or in terms of even regulation has to come in to ensure that people are not acting irresponsibly. So it's a combination of factors, but that would on a combined basis lead to the change which we all desire. Back to you.
Thank you so much. I don't think we have time for any more questions, but maybe I can pass it on to Professor Chandra if you have any last word on this.
No, Meenal, I don't. And all I can say is, what an enlightening conversation and a set of questions coming from the students. I can only kind of assure everybody that our efforts are to mainstream and create sustainability and efforts which become very central to our thinking at the university. So again, thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Satya. Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Professor Chandra, and everyone for joining. I just wanted to announce our next webinar happening later this month on just transitions. So Scotland has a just transition commission now, and how do you transition from coal to other transitions, and some person, an expert from India as well. So I hope you'll join. And I know we couldn't answer your questions on environment versus development, green growth. There's a lot of complex questions there. I have taken note of your chat, and I hope we can come to these difficult questions during the next webinar. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I close here. Bye-bye.